Is it possible that ancient civilizations may have possessed advanced technologies? In this episode, we explore that probability.
So now we've established that the universe creates through the structure of the vacuum, that the structure of the vacuum spinning produces the material world from the very small of the subplonk to the plonk to the protons to the atoms to the planets, the stars, the galaxies, the superclusters, the universes, and that universes are birthing each other as they emit particles. And we've established that in this creation structure of the structure of space-time, we end up with planets around stars everywhere. That stars most likely have planets around them that form as the result of the fluid dynamic vorticity that's being generated in the structure of space-time around them. And that many of these planets could host life. And certainly that life could be millions of years ahead of us in their technical development, which would mean that they most likely have discovered how to interact with the structure of space-time, with the structure of the vacuum, to open wormholes, to travel through black holes, to go across the universe, to emerge on this side of our galaxy, and discover our planet. We briefly looked at the history of man and talked about how there is some evidence that there was contact with advanced civilization in our deep past, in an era that now people are starting to call the pre-cataclysmic era, approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago, before the Great Flood, which most likely corresponds to the meltdown of the last ice age. This flood that was reported by over 300 different cultures all around the world, talking about the end of an earlier civilization that was very advanced, that was destroyed by a great cataclysm that involved a rise of the ocean and the flooding of all of these ancient civilizations. When the ancient people talk about this advanced ancient civilization, they talk as well of their capacity to fly in the air. They talk about their capacity to travel in the solar system, at least, if not in the galaxy, and to have interaction with beings from the stars, star beings, or sun gods. This is consistent in a very strong way all around the world from all these different civilizations which supposedly had no contact with each other. The probability that that would occur if these events were just fictitious, that all of these civilizations around the world would have developed the same myth, never mind built similar buildings, is very low. Talking about the way they built their buildings, none of these civilizations claim to have built some of these remarkable pyramidal structures that you find all around the world. A few decades ago, we only thought there was a few of these buildings, these pyramids around the world, the most known ones, the ones in Egypt, the one in Teotihuacan in Mexico, some of the ziggurats in Iran and in Persia. Now we have discovered many, many more pyramids all around the world. In some regions, we've discovered thousands and thousands of them. We found some in China. We found some under the water near Japan. Recently, using radar technology that can see under the foliage in southern Mexico and in Guatemala, we found thousands and thousands of pyramids were present, which would require that millions and millions of people live there. I believe that we are starting to discover the evidence of this earlier civilization that the ancient civilization talked about. When they talked about those buildings, they didn't show themselves building them. There is no hieroglyphs, for instance, in Egypt, on any wall in Egypt, that show them building the pyramids. They all said that the sun gods came from the stars and built these buildings on our planet and taught the humans at the time how to calculate, how to engineer, how to write, and so on. There seems to be a common theme when we look all around the planet in all of these traditions. It's very similar and it's remarkably consistent. One of the most obvious similarity is the engineering that you see in Peru and some of the engineering you see in Egypt, some of the engineering you see in Turkey. There's many different places around the world where you have these enormous stones that were moved, that were placed with precision that exceeds anything we have today. And when I talk about enormous stones, some of them are smaller, in excess of 20 ton, 30 ton. Some of them are much larger, in excess of 200, 300 ton. Sometimes moved across valleys and mountain range. Certain places in Peru where walls with blocks that exceeds 100 ton to 200 tons are found that were quarried in mountain ranges across from where they're found, so that the rocks would have had to be quarried at the top of these mountains, brought down into the valley and up another mountain to be placed where they are. And some of the stones, for instance, at the Valley Temple in Egypt, are 200-ton blocks that come from fairly far away, that are lined with 100-ton granite blocks that comes from hundreds of miles away. And the cut of these blocks is remarkable. Some of the blocks actually exceed 1,000 ton. 1,000-ton blocks are extremely difficult to move, and yet they've been moved across very large distances, hundreds of miles, across rivers, and in the case of some of the stones that are found in Egypt, for instance, at the Ramsesian temple, where a statue that was thought to be a statue of Ramses II is found that weigh in excess of 1,000 ton, and that comes from long distance from where it's found. And some of the monuments we see around the world may be from a much formidable age than what they are thought to be today. And actually, the archaeologists dated them with the later people that found them and that used them in their culture, because they thought they were the monuments of the gods and that they built a whole religion around it. But these monuments may predate this culture by a long shot. In fact, they may come from pre-cataclysmic flood, and so they may exceed 10 to 12,000 years, and in some cases be as old as 30 to 40,000 years. Some of the geological evidence on these buildings supports these claims. Why is this important? It's important because that means the history of humanity is vastly different than what we think it is. In fact, there is evidence that the human genome may not be the result of a linear evolution from monkeys to eventually Homo sapien. There is all of a sudden a huge spike, which is thought to be a missing link, in the evolution of, for instance, the cranial cavity of the Homo sapien from the Neanderthal. These changes that occurred don't seem to be part of a natural evolution. All of a sudden, the cranial cavity doubling in size, the brain doubling in size, the eyes are getting bigger, the loss of hair, all this stuff doesn't seem to be in the natural evolution of human beings the result of, natural transformation as a result of adaptation to the environment, but actually that there was an intervention that changed the genes of the structure of the evolution of our planet, and all of a sudden produced a being that was much more advanced, that might have been the result of the splicing of genes that made this sudden transformation of the evolution of hominids, all of a sudden producing the Homo sapien, which may have taken much, much longer without this intervention. Am I completely off track? Am I the only one thinking this? Is it completely crazy ideas that extraterrestrials may have come to our planet and alter or even seeded life on our planet? Francis Crick, one of the most venerated geneticists on our planet, the man that received the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of DNA, wrote papers in 1973 talking about this.
Panspermia theory suggests that life on Earth did not originate on our planet, but was transported here from somewhere else in the universe, perhaps spanning galaxies and solar systems. Microorganisms that were unintentionally distributed by space dust, meteorites, asteroids, and comets landed on Earth and started life here.
Crick thought that this theory was improbable, but he wrote that it had to have been implanted by advanced civilization that came to the Earth and implanted the genes that produce life on Earth, or at least some of the genome structure of on our planet was altered to produce the evolution we see today. Others, like William Brown, one of our biophysicists and molecular biologists at the Resonance Science Foundation, was able to identify the specific alteration of the gene that happened that produced the doubling of the cranial cavity of the Homo sapien from the earlier hominids. When he discovered this, it looked highly suspicious. It looks like an alteration of the gene that is typical of what we do today when we alter genes in GMO type of engineering. And so it may be that not only this advanced ancient civilization may have been on our planet prior to our written history, but that this earlier prior civilization was the source of the eventual evolution of Homo sapiens on our planet.